I watched my mother arrange white roses in crystal vases, her fingers moving with practiced precision across the entrance table of our family home. The engagement party was in 3 hours, and already my stomach twisted with a familiar dread I couldn't quite name. Daniel had kissed my forehead that morning before heading to pick up his parents from the airport, telling me to relax, that everything would be perfect. But Daniel didn't understand the particular physics of my family, how even my happiest moments had a way of tilting, recentering themselves around Victoria. "Meredith, help me with these place cards," my mother called, not looking up. "Victoria's arriving soon, and you know how particular she is about seating." Of course, Victoria's preferences. Victoria's comfort, Victoria's everything. At 28 years old, I should have been used to it. I'd spent my entire life as the opening act to my sister's main event, the warm-up comedian before the headliner, the opening band before the stadium show. Victoria was 31, impossibly beautiful in that effortless way that made people stop mid-conversation to stare. I was, as my aunt once kindly put it, handsome in good lighting. I arranged the place cards according to my mother's detailed seating chart, noting that Victoria had been positioned at the table closest to the small stage where the toasts would happen. My own fiancé and I were tucked away at a side table, as if we were guests at someone else's celebration. I said nothing. I had learned, over decades, that saying something only made things worse. The first guests arrived at 6:30. Daniel's parents, warm and genuinely thrilled, embraced me like I was already their daughter. My father shook Daniel's hand with the measured approval he reserved for adequate parking jobs and properly sorted recycling. My mother offered her cheek for Daniel's kiss, then immediately turned to greet the Wangs from my parents' country club, exclaiming over Mrs. Wang's handbag with more enthusiasm than she'd shown for my engagement ring. Victoria arrived at 7:45 minutes late, making an entrance in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, a job that seemed to involve mostly networking at expensive restaurants and posting aspirational content on social media. She swept into the room like visiting royalty, and my mother actually gasped with delight. "Darling, you look absolutely stunning." Victoria embraced our mother, then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Meredith. Congratulations, little sister. I'm so happy you finally found someone." The emphasis on "finally" was slight, probably unnoticeable to anyone who hadn't spent a lifetime cataloging her subtle cruelties. "Thank you for coming," I said, because good manners had been drilled into me even when they felt like self-betrayal. Daniel appeared at my side, his hand finding the small of my back, a gesture of solidarity that steadied me. "Victoria, good to see you. We're glad you could make it." She assessed him with the calculating look of an appraiser examining questionable merchandise. Of course, I wouldn't miss my baby sister's special day. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. "Though I have to say, you kept this one quiet. After Thomas, we all thought you'd given up on the whole relationship thing." My throat tightened. Thomas had been 3 years ago, a kind, patient man who had proposed to me after 2 years together. Then suddenly, inexplicably, he'd broken things off, saying he'd learned things about me that made him question whether he really knew me. He'd been vague, anguished, and final. I'd been devastated. Victoria had been sympathetic, bringing over wine and tissues, holding me while I cried. I'd never known what he'd learned until 18 months ago, when Thomas's best friend got drunk at a mutual friend's wedding and let something slip. Victoria had shown him fabricated messages, texts she'd manufactured to make it look like I was cheating. She'd created an entire affair from digital smoke and mirrors, and Thomas had believed her because why wouldn't he? She was my sister, my family. Thomas was a long time ago, I managed, my voice steady despite the memory. "Well, Daniel seems lovely," Victoria said, sipping her champagne. "I hope this one works out better." The party filled with people, my parents' friends, mostly, with a smaller contingent of my actual friends from the nonprofit where I coordinated youth literacy programs. Daniel's architectural firm colleagues mingled politely. My college roommate Sarah gave me a long hug and whispered, "You look like you're about to throw up. Are you okay?" "Family stuff," I whispered back, which was all the explanation she needed. By 8:30, dinner was served, an elaborate catered affair that my mother had planned with the same intensity some people reserve for actual weddings. I barely tasted the food, mechanically moving fork to mouth while conversations swirled around me. Victoria held court at her table, making everyone laugh with some story about a disastrous business trip to Chicago. My father listened with rapt attention, the way he'd never quite listened when I tried to tell him about the literacy program that had won a state grant. Then came the toasts. My father stood first, tapping his champagne flute with practiced authority. The room quieted. I felt Daniel's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently. "Friends, family, thank you all for being here tonight," my father began. "It's a wonderful occasion when we gather to celebrate love and commitment. Meredith has always been our steady, sensible daughter, the one we could count on to make responsible choices." Steady, sensible, responsible, the adjectives of invisibility. When she told us about Daniel, we were pleased to see her finally settling down. It's been quite a journey for her, she's had her challenges, as we all know, but she's found a good man and we're grateful for that. Challenges? As if my relationship history was a series of personal failings rather than calculated sabotage. My mother stood to add her thoughts, champagne in hand. "Meredith, dear, we're so proud of you. You've always been the quiet one, content to let others shine. And now you've found someone who appreciates." "I have to admit," my mother continued, her tone light, conspiratorial, meant to be funny, "we always knew your sister would marry first. Victoria's always been the one to dive headfirst into life, to take risks, to capture attention. But here you are, beating her to the altar." The room erupted in polite laughter. Victoria raised her glass with an indulgent smile, playing the gracious older sister. My mother beamed, my father chuckled. Daniel's grip on my hand became almost painful. "Well, Meredith," my mother concluded, "we may have bet on the wrong daughter, but we couldn't be happier to be wrong." More laughter, glasses raised, people drank. Something cracked inside me, not a sudden break, but the final fracture in something that had been developing fault lines for 28 years. I felt it physically, a shifting in my chest, like tectonic plates finally releasing their pressure. I stood up, the room didn't immediately notice. People were still chuckling, still drinking, still processing my mother's charming joke, but Daniel noticed. His eyes went wide. Sarah, across the room, straightened in her chair, recognizing something in my posture. "Do you want to know why Victoria didn't marry first?" My voice came out clear, calm, cutting through the ambient noise like a bell. Silence fell in stages, first the people nearest me, then rippling outward. My mother's smile froze. Victoria's glass paused halfway to her lips. My father's expression shifted to confusion, then warning. "Meredith," he said, "this isn't the time." "No, Dad, I think it's exactly the time." I was surprised by how steady I sounded, how clear. "Mom just made a joke about how you all bet on Victoria to marry first, and everyone laughed. But no one's asked the question, have they? Victoria's beautiful, charismatic, successful, so why hasn't she settled down? Why hasn't she been married twice over by now?" Victoria set down her glass, her face carefully blank. "Meredith, you're being dramatic." "Am I?" I turned to face her directly, across the room that had gone deathly silent. "Let me tell you all a story. When I was in college, I dated a guy named Marcus. He was pre-med, kind, completely smitten with me. We dated for 8 months. Then, right before winter formal, he broke up with me. Said he'd heard from a reliable source that I'd been trash-talking him to my friends, calling him boring and saying I was only with him because I couldn't do better." My mother made a small sound, but I kept going. I was devastated. I couldn't understand it. I'd never said anything like that. I loved Marcus. But he showed me screenshots of texts, supposedly from a mutual friend, confirming these conversations. I tried to defend myself, but what could I say against actual evidence? The friendship group fell apart. Marcus married someone else 2 years later, and I learned not to trust my own memory of events. Victoria's expression hadn't changed, but a muscle in her jaw twitched. Then there was James, my senior year. We were planning to move to the same city after graduation. He'd gotten into law school, I had a fellowship. The week before we graduated, he found a letter in his apartment. An anonymous letter detailing all the reasons I was supposedly using him, how I'd told people his family wasn't good enough for mine, how I was planning to break up with him after he'd committed to the same city. My voice gained strength as I spoke, fueled by years of suppressed truth. James showed me the letter. It was typed, untraceable, but it included specific details about conversations that could only have come from someone close to me. Someone who knew us both well. Someone who'd had access to his apartment when she'd visited that semester. I looked directly at Victoria. Her face had gone pale. Then there was Thomas. My voice caught slightly, but I pushed through. Thomas was going to be my husband. He proposed with his grandmother's ring. We were planning a spring wedding. And then, one day, he came to me with printed screenshots of text conversations. Conversations where I was supposedly coordinating hookups with other men, planning secret meetings, laughing about how I was playing him for a fool. Sarah gasped from her table. She'd been there for the Thomas breakup, had seen me nearly destroyed by it. The texts looked real. They had my name, my picture, but they weren't real. I didn't send them. I couldn't convince Thomas of that. The evidence was too convincing. So he left, and I spent months thinking I was losing my mind, questioning whether I had somehow sent those messages and blocked them from my memory. I went to therapy. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. I was put on medication. My mother had gone white. My father stood frozen, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. I didn't find out the truth until 18 months ago when I ran into Thomas's best friend Ryan at a wedding. He got drunk and felt guilty enough to tell me that Victoria had been the one who showed Thomas those screenshots. That she'd explained to Ryan, privately, that she'd found them on my phone when I'd left it unlocked, and she was just trying to protect Thomas from being hurt worse down the line. I turned back to Victoria, whose carefully maintained mask was beginning to crack. But here's the thing, Victoria, I never left my phone unlocked around you. I never had those conversations because they never existed. You created them. You manufactured them, just like you manufactured the texts about Marcus, just like you wrote that anonymous letter about James. You have systematically destroyed every relationship I've ever had because you couldn't stand the idea of me being happy when you weren't the center of attention. This is insane, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're having some kind of breakdown, Meredith, the stress of wedding planning. Is that why you asked to borrow my laptop last month? The voice came from Daniel, who had stood to stand beside me. You said yours was broken, and you needed to check an urgent work email, but I found you in Meredith's message apps, scrolling through her conversations with me. Victoria's eyes went wide. I didn't say anything at the time because I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe you were just looking for her email tab, Daniel continued, his architect's analytical mind piecing together evidence. But you weren't, were you? You were looking for ammunition, looking for something you could use to break us up before the engagement party. Daniel, I would never, Victoria started. You tried to friend me on Facebook under a fake account, Sarah called out from her table, standing. 3 months ago. The profile picture was some stock photo, but the account had been created the same day it sent me the friend request. When I didn't accept, I got a message asking if I knew about Meredith's concerning behavior and whether I thought Daniel knew what he was getting into. The room erupted in murmurs. Victoria looked around wildly, searching for support. That's not Sarah, you can't possibly think I would. I kept the screenshots, Sarah said quietly. The IP address traced back to this house, your parents' house, Victoria, where you've been living for the past 6 months, since you broke up with what's his name. My mother finally found her voice. Girls, this is absurd, you're sisters. Meredith, this jealousy is beneath you. Jealousy, the word came out as a harsh laugh. Mom, I have never been jealous of Victoria. I have been erased by her. Do you know what it's like to grow up watching your parents light up for one daughter and offer polite acknowledgement for the other? Do you know what it feels like to win a state grant? My father set down his glass with shaking hands. Meredith, we have always been proud of both our daughters. You literally introduced me to the Lees last Christmas as our other daughter, I interrupted. Not Meredith, not by name. Our other daughter, and when I corrected you, you laughed it off as a joke. The silence was absolute now, suffocating. I have spent my entire life making myself smaller so Victoria could be bigger, I continued, my voice breaking. I chose a nonprofit career instead of corporate law because I knew she couldn't stand the competition. I didn't study abroad because she'd failed out of her semester in Paris, and you couldn't stand the comparison. I have diminished myself year after year, and it was never enough. Because Victoria doesn't just want to be the favorite, she wants to be the only one. Victoria's perfect composure finally shattered. You think you're so noble, Meredith. You think you're the victim here. You have no idea what it's like to be the older sister watching the younger one get all the natural goodness, all the genuine kindness. You're the good daughter, you didn't have to work for it. People just naturally like you, trust you. I've had to perform my entire life. The confession hung in the air like smoke. So you admit it, I asked softly. You sabotaged my relationships because you resented me. Victoria's hands were shaking. I didn't, it wasn't like that, I was trying to protect you. Those guys weren't good enough for you. Marcus was boring, James was pretentious. Thomas was going to leave you anyway. I could see it coming. You had no right. The words exploded from me. You had no right to make those decisions for me. You had no right to play God with my life because you couldn't manage your own. My mother stepped forward, her social chair instincts kicking in, trying to manage the crisis. Meredith, Victoria, please, our guests. Our guests? I turned to her, and I saw her actually flinch at whatever she saw in my face. Our guests just heard you make a joke about betting on the wrong daughter. Our guests just heard you acknowledge, out loud, that you've always expected Victoria to succeed where I failed. And now our guests are learning that the reason I failed is because my own sister couldn't stand to see me happy. I looked around the room at the frozen faces, my parents' friends, my colleagues, Daniel's family. Mrs. Chen, Daniel's mother, had tears streaming down her face. My college friends looked stricken. The caterers had stopped serving, frozen in place like everyone else. I want you all to understand something, I said, addressing the room at large. I didn't want to do this here. I didn't want to explode my family in public. I spent 28 years avoiding exactly this kind of scene. But my mother stood up tonight and made a joke about how I was the surprise, the underdog, the daughter they didn't bet on. And I realized I will never be bet on. Not by them, not as long as I keep pretending this is normal. I turned to my parents. You enabled this. You created a hierarchy where Victoria learned that her value came from being superior to me, and I learned that my value came from being invisible. You praised her for the same ambition you criticized in me. You laughed off her cruelty as competitiveness, while demanding I be endlessly understanding. You made us into this. My father's face crumpled. Meredith, we love you both equally. No, Dad, you don't. You love the idea of loving us equally. But love requires seeing people, and you've never really seen me. You've seen the role I play in Victoria's story, the supporting character, the one who makes her shine brighter by comparison. I turned to Victoria, who was crying now, mascara streaking her perfect face. I don't hate you, I told her, and I meant it. I pity you, because you're 31 years old, and you're still so desperate for Mom and Dad's approval that you had to destroy my happiness to feel secure. You're brilliant and beautiful, and you could have done anything, been anything, but you spent your energy tearing me down instead of building yourself up. Meredith, please, Victoria reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I'm done. I turned to Daniel, who was watching me with an expression of fierce pride mixed with concern. I'm sorry, this isn't how I wanted your parents to spend their first night in town. Daniel's mother stood and crossed to me, taking my hands in hers. My dear girl, she said, her accent thick with emotion, you have nothing to apologize for, nothing. Daniel's father joined her, his weathered face gentle. We raised our son to choose a woman of strength and character. Tonight, you've shown us both. I felt tears finally spill over, and Daniel pulled me into his arms. Over his shoulder, I saw my mother standing frozen, my father pale and shaking. Victoria collapsed into a chair with her face in her hands. The room full of guests watched in stunned silence. I think we're leaving now, I said, my voice muffled against Daniel's shoulder. Whatever you need, he murmured. Sarah appeared with my purse and wrap. I'll coordinate getting Daniel's parents to their hotel. You two go. As we moved toward the door, my mother found her voice. Meredith, wait, please, we can talk about this, we can fix this. I stopped but didn't turn around. There's nothing to fix, Mom, you made your choice decades ago. You chose Victoria over and over until the choice became who you are. I'm just finally accepting it. You're our daughter, my father started. So is Victoria, I said, finally turning to face them. And you'll still have her, she's the one you wanted anyway. My mother's face crumpled. That's not true, Meredith, please. It is true. And the saddest part is, you don't even realize it. You've been so focused on managing Victoria's ego, on keeping her happy and centered, that you never noticed you were sacrificing me to do it. And I let you. I made myself small, I swallowed every slight, I convinced myself that being the easy daughter was a virtue. But it wasn't virtue, it was just survival. I looked at Victoria one last time. I hope you get help, I genuinely do. Because this, I gestured around the ruined party, this is what your competition instinct has created. A room full of people who now see you clearly, and I don't think you're going to like being seen. Daniel and I walked out into the cool night air. Behind us, I could hear my mother sobbing, my father's attempts to calm the guests, the murmur of shocked conversation. The door closed on all of it. Are you okay? Daniel asked, his arm around my waist. I don't know, I admitted. Ask me in a month or a year. His car was parked down the street. We walked in silence until we reached it, and then I turned to face him. If you want to postpone the wedding, I understand. This is a lot of family drama. He kissed me, cutting off the words. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. Meredith Chen, I have never been more certain of anything than I am about marrying you. What you did in there, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You stood up for yourself, for us, for the truth. That's the woman I love. That's the woman I want to build a life with. I leaned into him, letting his certainty steady me. My family's probably never going to forgive me. Then we'll build our own family. With people who see you, who value you, who don't require you to shrink to make them comfortable. We drove to his apartment in silence, my phone already buzzing with texts and calls that I ignored. When we got inside, I finally looked at the screen. 17 missed calls from my mother, 8 from Victoria. Dozens of texts ranging from my parents' frantic apologies, to Victoria's increasingly unhinged accusations, to messages from relatives I barely knew, offering their 2 cents on family drama they'd witnessed secondhand. What happens now? I asked Daniel as we sat on his couch, still in our party clothes, surrounded by the ruins of what should have been a celebration. Now you decide what you want, he said simply. Not what they want. Not what you think you should want, what you actually want. I thought about it, really thought about it, maybe for the first time in my life. What did I want? I want to get married at City Hall, I said slowly. Just us, your parents, maybe Sarah and a few friends. I want it to be about us, not about managing my family's dysfunction. Done. I want to take a honeymoon, somewhere my mother can't track us down to process her feelings. Consider it booked. And I want, my voice caught, I want to not feel guilty about it. I want to choose myself and not spend the rest of my life apologizing for it. Daniel pulled me close. That might be the hardest part. He was right. In the days that followed, the guilt came in waves. My mother's voicemails, wounded, confused, angry, pleading, piled up on my turned-off phone. My father sent emails that started with, I don't understand why, and ended with, after everything we've done for you. Victoria created a counter-narrative on social media about sibling rivalry and mental health struggles, positioning herself as the concerned sister dealing with a troubled sibling. Some of my parents' friends reached out to express their concern about my outburst. A few of my relatives sent messages suggesting I was being too harsh, that family should forgive, that I was throwing away my heritage and values over a simple misunderstanding. But other messages came too. My college roommate from sophomore year, who I'd lost touch with years ago, wrote to say she'd always wondered what happened with that guy I'd been dating. He'd broken up with me after Victoria had visited that weekend, and she'd always thought the timing was suspicious. A woman from my graduate program reached out to say Victoria had befriended her during our thesis year, and had spent months subtly suggesting I was unstable and unreliable. The pattern emerged clearly once people felt safe enough to speak. Victoria had spent years managing my reputation, seeding doubts, creating obstacles, and I had never known because I'd been taught to never question the family narrative. Sarah came over one night with wine and takeout, sitting with me while Daniel worked late on a project deadline. How are you really doing? She asked, not accepting my automatic I'm fine. I thought about it. I feel like I'm grieving, I admitted. Not for the family I had, but for the family I thought I might eventually have. Like if I just tried hard enough, was good enough, maybe they'd finally see me. And now, I know that was never going to happen. That's not a failure on your part, Sarah said gently. That's a failure on theirs. I know, intellectually I know. But I still feel like I should have tried harder, compromised more, been less dramatic. Stop. Sarah set down her wine glass. Meredith, listen to me. You spent 28 years compromising. You shrunk yourself down to pocket size to make your sister feel tall. You censored your achievements, dimmed your light, swallowed your hurt. The only thing you didn't try was completely erasing yourself. And honestly, it seemed like you were getting close to that too. Her words hit like a physical blow because they were true. What you did at that party wasn't dramatic, Sarah continued. It was self-preservation. You finally told the truth about what was being done to you. The fact that the truth was dramatic says everything about what you were surviving. I cried then, the kind of deep, racking sobs I'd been holding back for days. Sarah held me and let me soak her shirt with tears and mascara and snot, not offering platitudes or solutions, just presence. When I finally stopped crying, she handed me tissues and said, "So what's the plan?" City Hall wedding in 2 weeks. Honeymoon in Portugal. Then I come back and figure out how to have a life that's actually mine. I'll be at City Hall, Sarah promised. Front row seat. The wedding was small and perfect. Daniel's parents cried happy tears. Sarah served as my witness and made a toast about choosing the family we deserve. My boss from the nonprofit came and brought me a first edition of my favorite children's book. A handful of friends gathered afterward at a small restaurant Daniel had reserved, and we ate too much and laughed too loud and celebrated something real. My parents weren't there, Victoria wasn't there, and their absence was noticeable but not devastating. I missed the parents I'd wanted, the ones who would have been proud, who would have celebrated my happiness. But I didn't miss the parents I actually had, the ones who would have found a way to make my wedding day about Victoria's feelings. We left for Portugal the next morning. For 2 weeks, I turned off my phone and learned to simply be present in my own life. Daniel and I wandered through Lisbon's narrow streets, ate pastéis de nata in the morning, drank wine overlooking the Douro Valley. We talked about everything and nothing, our future, our pasts, the strange liberation of being completely unknown in a foreign place. One night, sitting on our hotel balcony watching the sunset, I finally told Daniel something I'd barely admitted to myself. I'm scared I'm going to wake up one day and regret it, cutting them off. That's allowed, he said. You can regret it and still know it was necessary. Both things can be true. How did you get so wise? I'm an architect. I thought about that metaphor often in the months that followed. We returned from Portugal to a new apartment. We decided to move somewhere that was ours, untainted by either of our family histories. I threw myself into work, launching a new initiative at the nonprofit that I'd been too nervous to propose before. It was ambitious, risky, exactly the kind of thing I would have talked myself out of because it might make Victoria feel competitive or my parents uncomfortable with the attention. The program succeeded beyond my expectations, earning recognition from the state education department and a feature in the local news. My parents didn't call to congratulate me. Victoria didn't sabotage it. The silence from that corner of my life was absolute, but other things filled the space they'd left. Daniel's parents became genuinely involved in our lives, not as polite observers, but as active participants. His mother taught me to make dumplings from scratch. His father helped us install bookshelves in our new apartment. They asked about my work with real interest and celebrated my successes with actual joy. I reconnected with old friends who I'd lost touch with during the years of relationship sabotage and family management. I made new friends through work and Daniel's social circle, people who knew me as I was now, not as I had been in the shadow of my family dynamics. 6 months after the engagement party, I received a letter from my mother. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter, written in her precise handwriting on expensive stationery. I stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it. The letter was long, rambling, cycling through anger and hurt and justification and apology without ever quite landing on genuine accountability. She missed me. She didn't understand why I was being so cruel. She'd sacrificed everything for her daughters. Didn't I remember all the good times? Wasn't I being unfair to judge their entire parenting on a few isolated incidents? Victoria was in therapy now, working on her issues. Couldn't we be a family again? I read it twice, then put it in a drawer. Are you going to respond? Daniel asked. I don't know, maybe eventually, but not now. Who I was, it turned out, was someone who laughed more easily. Someone who proposed ambitious projects without preemptively apologizing for them. Someone who bought clothes in colors brighter than beige and gray. Someone who, when introduced, gave my full name and profession without downplaying either. A year after the engagement party, Sarah and I met for coffee, and she studied me across the table with a small smile. What? I asked. You look different, lighter somehow. I lost 10 pounds of family dysfunction, I joked, but it felt true in a way that went deeper than humor. Are you happy? She asked seriously. I thought about it, really thought about it. Was I happy? I was sometimes sad about the family I didn't have. I sometimes felt guilty about the pain I'd caused, even though intellectually I knew I'd done nothing wrong. I sometimes grieved for the sister relationship that could have been, in some alternate universe, where our parents hadn't pitted us against each other. But I was also free. Free to succeed without worrying about managing someone else's jealousy. Free to love Daniel without waiting for the sabotage. Free to take up space in my own life. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Yeah, I'm happy. Victoria reached out eventually, about 18 months after the engagement party. Not through my parents but directly, a long email sent at 3 in the morning, clearly written in some moment of crisis or clarity or both. She acknowledged some of it. Not all of it, not with the depth of understanding I might have wanted, but enough. She was in therapy. She was trying to understand why she'd done what she'd done. She wanted to apologize, though she also wanted me to understand how hard it had been for her. Being the older sister with the younger sister everyone naturally liked more. I read the email and felt a complicated mixture of compassion and anger and exhaustion. She was still centering herself in the narrative, still making her pain the explanation for my suffering. But she was also trying, in her limited way, to acknowledge reality. I didn't respond immediately. I took it to my own therapist. I'd started going a few months after the engagement party, working through decades of conditioning and people-pleasing, and learned invisibility. What do you want from a relationship with Victoria? My therapist asked. I don't know if I want one, I admitted. Is that terrible? Why would it be terrible? Because she's my sister. Because family is supposed to forgive. Because maybe if I'm the bigger person. Meredith, my therapist interrupted gently, you've spent your entire life being the bigger person. How has that worked out for you? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. I eventually responded to Victoria's email with a brief message, acknowledging her apology, but making clear I needed more time and space. I didn't commit to reconciliation. I didn't offer easy forgiveness. I simply stated my reality. What she'd done had caused deep damage, and whether or not she'd meant to cause that damage didn't erase its effects. She responded with anger first. How dare I not accept her apology? She was trying so hard. I was being stubborn and unforgiving. Then came bargaining. Couldn't we just meet for coffee, just talk? She'd changed so much. Then sadness. She missed me. She was sorry, please. I held my boundary. And holding that boundary felt like the most radical act of self-love I'd ever committed. My parents remained more distant, their communications filtered through hurt feelings and inability to understand why their family had fallen apart. They seemed genuinely confused about what they'd done wrong, unable or unwilling to examine the decades of favoritism and enabling that had created the dynamics Victoria and I had acted out. I mourned them, the parents I'd wanted, the parents I'd spent my childhood trying to earn. But I didn't chase them. I let them go. Instead, I built something new. Daniel and I hosted Thanksgiving that year, inviting his parents, Sarah, a few colleagues from work, a couple who'd moved from my literacy program's neighborhood and had become friends. We cooked too much food and played board games and laughed until we cried. It was chaotic and imperfect, and nothing like the formal, tense dinners of my childhood. It was better. As I watched Daniel's father teach Sarah's new boyfriend to play chess while his mother corrected my dumpling folding technique with patient humor, I realized this was what family could be. Not performance. Not hierarchy. Just people choosing to show up for each other day after day with genuine care. "You good?" Daniel asked, finding me in the kitchen where I'd escaped for a moment of quiet. "Yeah," I said, and meant it completely. "I'm really good." He kissed my forehead and returned to the living room, where someone had started a heated debate about the best superhero movie. I stayed in the kitchen for another moment, listening to the sounds of laughter and argument and life happening in my home, my actual home, the one I'd chosen, with people I'd chosen, living a life I'd chosen. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, a family photo from their Christmas card shoot featuring just my parents and Victoria, all of them in coordinating cream and gold outfits. The message read, "Wish you were here." I looked at the photo for a long moment, studying the faces of people I'd once tried so hard to please. Then I deleted the message and returned to my living room, to my chosen family, to my actual life. They didn't wish I was there. They wished I was the version of me who made them comfortable, small, quiet, willing to absorb hurt without complaint. That person was gone, and I didn't miss her at all. If you've experienced family favoritism, if you've been the other sibling, if you've had to make the painful choice between family loyalty and self-preservation, I see you. Your pain is valid. Your anger is justified. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. The family we're born into gives us our first lessons about love and belonging, but we don't have to accept those lessons as final. We can unlearn. We can choose differently. We can build new families from the people who see us, value us, celebrate us as we actually are. And that choice, the choice to be seen rather than managed, to be celebrated rather than tolerated, to be chosen rather than obligated, that's not breaking a family. That's saving yourself.